Never caught a cobia, kept looking for it. Never really, that wasn't my target fish, but I always hoped that I would kind of stumble onto one. Out fishing one day with my daughter-in-law, novice fisher person, and she fished maybe 3 times. She catches a 40-pound cobia. That's my life, okay? And she's never let me forget it in 10 years. But Captain Chris is going to talk about his techniques, what he does, how he does it. He's local here. How many years you been fishing around here?
My entire life.
Which is 25 years?
More like 40.
Okay, 40 years
I've
fishing
been
here.
fishing professionally this will be my 13th season.
Okay. So he's going to bring that 13 years of experience, and he's going to close the gap on what you don't know and save you some money by telling you what you need to use and save you some frustration telling you about how to use it. Captain Chris?
All right, guys. First off, I don't know about the saving money part. I don't know anybody that's ever been saving money going fishing. I wish I could figure out a way to save a little money. My name's Captain Chris Kimmery. I grew up, if you're familiar with the area, I grew up down in Atlantic, way out in the boonies, fishing out of Drum Inlet and the east side. I grew up with my dad fishing down there. Now I keep my boat over behind Chasing Tails Outdoors in Atlantic Beach, right there on the causeway. And I do fish full time. I fish about 200 days a year. And cobia fishing is one of my absolute favorites. I think it's everybody's favorite since people learned how to catch them a variety of ways. When I was growing up, we all bottom fished for cobia. And a lot of the fishing we did was inside. Now there's a lot of different techniques we've learned in recent years, being the last 10 years or so. That's made it even more fun, and it's a lot more effective. So with all that being said, I handed out a rack card, which just gives you a little rundown, a little contact info. And probably the best way to catch a cobia is just to book a full day charter with me. I'll go ahead and say that, if you're not real good at it. Now that we got all that behind us, how many people here have targeted cobia? How many people here have caught cobia while they were targeting cobia? How many people have caught cobia sight casting while targeting cobia? All right, so we got a couple of believers right here. First off, I want to talk a little bit about what makes spring cobia fishing happen. And I'm a little long-winded, so I'm going to try to keep this tight. Cobia are here from late spring until late fall. They're here, period. The thing that makes cobia fishing in the spring so good is right now the cobia are offshore, but a lot of them winter on the inner limits of the Gulf Stream, on bottom and wrecks and rocks, and the rest of them winter down south. As the water starts warming, and the years that the water warms really quick, which is kind of what we're setting up right now, historically the way things are unfolding weather-wise now should make it a fairly good cobia year. When the water warms really quick, those fish, I know for a fact, because I know somebody that caught 6 cobia yesterday in 170 feet of water straight out of Beaufort Inlet. And they caught 6, but they saw 100. They're there. They're just waiting for that water to get up. You know, the high 60s, right around the 70-degree mark, and they're going to push in. And in the years that the water warms really quick, it allows those cobia that are wintering offshore and the ones that are south to push in. And when it warms up quick, they all come at once. When it warms up kind of slow, and those of you that have cobia fish know the year before last, we had a real warm March, we had a real cold April, and the water gradually warmed up. And we caught fish all the way through the end of June, but they just trickled in. So it wasn't a great year for sight casting or bait ball fishing because the bait was scattered and the fish trickled in. Now last year was a lot different. It warmed up pretty quick, the bait came in like it was supposed to, and last year was not the best year, but it was a better than average sight casting year. In the world of charter fishing, we always hate to talk numbers, but we had days last year that we legally either caught and released or kept part of 20 plus fish. You know, and that's strong. That's a lot of big fish, especially when you're sitting there looking at the beach. And that's another thing that makes cobia fishing so desirable, because the fellow with the 19-foot Carolina skiff on a pretty day can go right outside the inlet and catch a 60-pound fish. You know, he's probably not going to take that boat and catch a 60-pound wahoo, but he can get that cobia. And in addition to that, besides being a great fight, they're tasty. Everybody likes tasty, at least I do. So, you know, with all that being said, hopefully the way things are setting up this year, we've got a little cold spurt coming in tomorrow, but then it's supposed to warm right back up. Things should set up. Into April, first part of May, cobia should start showing up. Usually it's gonna be second week, third week of May when they really get thick. 4 years ago, which was probably the best cobia fishing I've ever done here in the state of North Carolina, the fish literally showed up overnight. I did a trip on a Tuesday, and we struggled and struggled and struggled, and we caught one fish, and it was a big one. And then on Wednesday, I actually didn't have a trip, and by about 11 o'clock Wednesday morning, all my charter fishing friends are just blowing my phone up going, why aren't you out here? I'm like, I don't have a trip. You know, I don't have a trip. The fishing hadn't been that good, and they're like, you're wrong, you need to get out here. So I called a buddy, we went out, and in an afternoon, we lost count at around 130 fish or so that we saw. And I don't know how many we landed. Somewhere around 30 or 35 fish. It got to the point if it didn't weigh 50 pounds, we wouldn't even throw at it. And that was literally overnight, the same place I fished the day before. So keep that in mind. A lot of people get discouraged cobia fishing because it can change. You have these little waves of fish coming through. You know, you might go one day and draw a blank, and the next day it might be like what I just described 4 years ago. So don't get discouraged because you find a bait ball and everything looks perfect, you don't catch one. Just try again the next day. Does anybody have any questions so far? Is everybody awake? Okay. So next I'm going to start off with the basics of cobia fishing. When I was growing up here as a kid, the main way we caught cobia, the main way we targeted cobia, let me rephrase that, was bottom fishing. And we would use a variety of baits, typically a fresh menhaden. We call them shad, but it's a bunker, shad, menhaden, whatever you want to call it. And we would bottom fish with a rig like this right here. And back then we didn't use circle hooks, but I'm pretty much exclusively circle hooks. We take like a 9/0 J hook and rig it up Carolina style, where your sinker slides, and just a little 28, 30-inch piece of leader with a good swivel and a good bead. Take 4, 5, 6 of these. We'd anchor up usually around in inlets or somewhere that there have been lots of sightings of cobias. Back then we fished a lot inside, like the Marine Fisheries dock up here and inside the Hook and Barton's Inlet, Beaufort Inlet. Even in the turning basin back then we used to anchor up and catch them. And just fresh shad or live shad, you can use spots, croakers, cut mullet. I've even seen people use squid. Shad has always been my preference, and usually live if I can get them, just because they're a little more resistant to bait snatchers. You know, the crabs and the little pinfish and all that stuff nibbling on the dead baits. But you would set up and fish 4 or 6 of these, get on anchor and set them all out, and then hurry up and wait. Kind of like catfishing, which cobia kind of resembles catfish. And he doesn't always feed like a catfish, but sometimes he does on the bottom. Sometimes while we were doing that, we would light line. Everybody's seen the old balloon rig, a piece of leader, set it out and let it drift in the current with a live bait. We would do that as well. And we always had something ready to throw at them, whether it be a live bait or a bucktail. Something like this. This is a new little bucktail that's out in the Dane. I brought it because in the world of cobia jigs, this one's fairly inexpensive. This one's made by Tsunami Bait Company, which is a division of Bimini Bay. And it comes already rigged, already has a worm on it and everything, and you can get into one of these for about $5.50. And for a cobia bucktail, that's reasonable, very reasonable. Some of the other stuff is selling for $8, $10, $12. A lot of times they won't even have a worm on it. So, but when we were anchored up, we'd always have something like that ready to throw at them. And we caught fish, but it was a hurry up and wait. And there's times that we still fish that way. That's what we did year before last. The sight cast fishing was very poor, and I've got pretty much 5 weeks of cobia charters booked literally every day. And so I'm like, well, we're gonna have to go back to the basics here. So what I would do, you know, through my network of people, some people were still trying to cobia fish sight casting, and they were usually drawing blanks. And so I just said, okay, until I hear any different, when I pick my charter up in the morning, we're gonna go catch fresh bait, plenty of it. I'm gonna take my bottom fishing rods and maybe a chum bag, and I'm gonna go set up where I know I've caught cobia for years, bottom fishing, and that's what we did. And there was days we'd have 3, 4 fish, some days we wouldn't get any, there were some days we had 8 or 9 fish. So I was getting the job done. And a lot of people gave up on cobia fishing because they didn't want to revert back to the old school. If they couldn't ride around and see him and throw at him, they didn't want to mess with him. But most of my clients were pretty satisfied, other than the few blanks that I drew. But that's fishing. I don't know anybody that's 100% unless they're fishing somewhere in a fish farm. You know, people ask me all the time about guarantees. They guarantee we catch fish, and I tell them the same thing every time. I guarantee to take you fishing. That's my guarantee. So, but hopefully that won't be the case this year. Hopefully this year we'll have, you know, masses of bait and masses of free swimming cobia where everybody can get out there and sight fish. But if you get tired riding around, if your power bill is too much and you can't fill your boat up with gas or whatever, or if mama's getting on you for spending too much on gas, you can always anchor up and bottom fish, and you've got a really good chance at catching that cobia. Now with that said, I'm gonna name off the #1 mistake I see people make. And I see this all the time. And people have asked me in the past, because I fish a lot, so I'm pretty good at it. They've asked me, how come I can anchor up beside you and not catch a fish and you'll catch 3 on your charter? And I'm getting ready to tell you why. Because you have to check that bait. That time of the year, mid-May, you've got just masses of stuff that's moving in, and it's all hungry. Everything in the ocean is always hungry, but especially in the spring like that, early summer. So you take those menhaden, even if they're alive, and you throw your 4 rods out, and you sit back on your console and get to looking at your phone or drinking cold beer or watching the bikinis go by, and don't check that bait for 30 or 45 minutes. If there's anything on that bottom, what we call a bait snatcher, after the first 5 minutes, you're fishing on credit. So if you sit there 45 minutes, 40 of those minutes you weren't even fishing. That's the #1 mistake people make. If you watch myself and the other professional guides around here, or any of the guys that are really good fishermen, when we're on anchor cobia fishing, we're literally going from rod to rod to rod, reeling in and checking bait the entire time we're sitting there. And that's the difference between catching them on the bottom and not. And if you think I'm kidding, you see me anchored up, stop and watch me for 10 minutes and you'll see. Rod to rod to rod. Now, there's some days when you get out there that you're gonna be like, man, I've reeled this thing in 9 times, just like Captain Chris said, and the bait's always there. Now, on those days, maybe you don't need to check it as frequently. More times than not, 2 out of 3 times, they're gonna start working on that bait as soon as it hits the bottom. And a school of pinfish can eat a menhaden this big in just a matter of minutes. And if you don't have bait on that hook, you can catch fish on bare hooks. I've done it, but it's hard. That's all I'm saying. So check that bait religiously. Anytime you have the opportunity to fish with either live or fresh bait, do it. Plenty of fish caught on dead bait. Dead bait works good, but don't ever pass up the opportunity to get some fresh bait, especially if you're gonna bottom fish. Everybody get that? Got that locked in? Fresh bait, and you have to have bait. It sounds really elementary, but I watch people all day long while I'm fishing, and I see lots of people make that mistake. Any questions?
How are you hooking up your menhaden, dead or alive?
The same way.
All right.
Go underneath, like between where his gills meet, and come out between his eyes. Now, I'm using an 8 or 9/0 circle hook, usually an 8/0 circle hook. But if you hook him that way, there's some advantages, especially if he's dead. And the main advantage is, when you hook him up, straighten him. If he's got a big bend in him or something, limber him up and get him straight, and hook him from underneath, it makes him hydrodynamic. Big word. Y'all didn't know I was that smart, did you? But what happens is, if he's got a big crook in him, or you hook him sideways, it's just gonna sit there and twist. Anywhere you're cobia fishing, there's always current. And if it's twisting, you're creating a failure point in your setup. And that's the last thing you wanna do. You wanna keep everything as smooth as you can in that current.
The leader, what weight and line?
This
that-
leader right here is 60-pound fluorocarbon. Bottom fishing, I tend to use heavier leaders because big rays, big sharks. I mean, we've hooked rays. This outfit right here, and I'm gonna go over rods before I move into the next little bit of this, but this rod right here, and I'm not promoting any form of tackle or anything, but I'm just gonna tell you what it is, and any setup similar to this will be great. This is a 6,000 class reel. It's got 65-pound braid. This rod right here is rated for 65 to 200-pound braid. Now these are my primary bottom fishing rods when I'm cobia fishing. I also use them for groupers, amberjacks, and sharks because they're mules. They're expensive. You know, you're looking at a $600 setup, but you can't break these. I know, I've tried. You know what I'm saying? So, with that being said, bottom fishing, big rays, big sharks, we've landed sharks on 50-pound fluorocarbon mainly because of that circle hook. Just hooked right in the edge of the lip that weigh 200-300 pounds. And since he doesn't have the leader material in his mouth, you can get him in. But I tend to use heavier stuff when I'm bottom fishing. This is 60, which is probably as light as I would go bottom fishing. Usually it's gonna be 80, something like that, 60 or 80. And that's just because there's a lot of big bycatch when you're bottom fishing. When you're sight casting, you'll occasionally hook that big shark or something, but you don't have the same problems. You had a question back there?
You pretty much answered it, Chris, thank you.
Okay, great.
What kind of current, too much or too little for current? I mean, inside the inlet, it gets to be pretty raging through there.
It does, and here's the deal. Raging current is not necessarily a bad thing. This is rigged up with a 3-ounce egg sinker, and I always use egg sinkers, mainly because it streamlines my rig and there's less chance for tangling. You know, for me, I'm working hard to get this fish on the line for my client. And the last thing I want to do is implant something that could increase the chances of failure. And I'm gonna be frank, because a lot of my clients hired me because they're not that great at this. So I don't want to give them anything else to think about. If you can use like a big pyramid sinker or something on a fish finder, but you're gonna have more problems once you get the fish on. With that being said, there's some days we might go as high as an 8-ounce egg sinker. Something else. That's another thing when you're checking your baits. Like at Beaufort Inlet, we get on the east side of the channel there. You'll see the boats just lined up forever when the bite's hot. A lot of times what we'll do, depending on which way the current's running, is we'll fish one side of the boat. And I may have 4 lines set up, because when the current's strong, rarely can you fish more than that. And you'll go from rod to rod to rod, but what'll happen is the lines are sweeping back. The one that sweeps back the furthest, that's the one you check. And then after you get it checked, you throw it out in front of the pack, and then the other 3 are still sweeping. So you're just constantly rotating because they're sweeping this way, you're grabbing that rod, moving it up, and then grabbing the next one. So you're just kind of like musical chairs going around because they're sweeping back. That's a lot of work. But A, you're making sure you've got bait because you're constantly having to check them. And B, is that bait sweeping and rolling and tumbling along the edge of that drop off? You never know. This cobia just cruise right up and down that tide line, and you're covering more bottom than just having it sitting in one place. So there's advantages of that strong current. There's not many days that the current's gonna be too strong to fish. If I had to pick one thing I'd be worried about is water clarity. I like fishing an outgoing tide at Beaufort Inlet and Barton's Inlet. After lots of rain, all the stuff coming out of the river and ICW sometimes can dirty that water up. And some days the water coming out will be dirty and it's meeting up with the cleaner water. I always try to fish the clean water, and then some days it doesn't matter. But that current, you want to try to get your bait on the bottom, most of them. You know, you might put one in a water column or on the surface. Don't be scared to use a lot of lead.
Did you say 60 to 80 pound braid?
My leader material when I'm bottom fishing is going to be 60 to 80. The braid on those rods is 65. And you can use a lighter setup. I know plenty of guys use 40 or 50. I use those heavier things just as a little reassurance for me, because I don't want to hook that fish and have my customer break him off. So I try to soup everything up a little bit.
You let the cobia take it and wait, not like.
See, that's another beautiful thing about that circle hook. And that's something I failed to mention when I was talking about the old days. We used to use the J hooks. And when you pick it up and you wait and you count and you're nervous and you're like, oh man, I want to get him, I want to, and you set the hook and he wouldn't be there. With that circle hook, you put it in the rod holder, and I've said this a million times, and when he bends the rod over and starts taking drag, you pick him up and you reel him in. You don't have to do nothing else. He'll set it himself. Cobias, most time they pick a bait up, they're not going to haul butt. They're just going to swim away at kind of a steady pace because they're playing follow the leader with all their little buddies. And that good, sharp, new, shiny, smooth hook, if he's making just a few miles an hour, when it comes tight, he's going to hook himself. Every time. My hookup ratio with a circle hook is 3 times better than it ever was with a J hook cobia fishing. very true, for sure. Any other questions? All right, so we talked a little bit about this rod. This is what I would call the top end of the spectrum for something you would need cobia fishing. There's not a cobia on planet Earth that I can't land with this rod. You know what I'm saying? I mean, he's in trouble. But a lot of times, especially when I have regular clients, guys that I know are fair fishermen, or guys that just want to live dangerously, we'll move into some lighter stuff. This rod right here, believe it or not, is the same style of rod as this. This is made for jigging. It's made for braided line. This rod is rated for 15 to 40 pound braid, which is pretty light, and it's a jigging rod. And it's really ergonomic. This reel is a 40 class reel, and it's a little low on line, but this is 30 or 40 pound braid. I think it's 40. This reel's got a good drag. This is about a $350, $400 setup. But the difference between this rod and that rod, remember these are bottom fishing. This rod here you can jig vertically or you can cast, and it's real light. It's not going to wear you out. If you're riding around throwing at a bait ball all day and you're handling that thing, at the end of the day you're going to be worn out. This is way lighter, probably weighs a third what that does. But it's still a very stout outfit. And this is kind of the middle of the road outfit. And you can bottom fish with these. Matter of fact, last year I had two guys hire me to take them to catch a shark. And first line out shark fishing, we had a 35 pound cobia on this rod. And then I have another rod identical to this. The next fish was a 72 pound cobia on this rod. And then they were like, well, we don't even want to catch sharks now, just take us home. So that was the end of that. Matter of fact, that guy's fishing with me again this coming week. So apparently he had a good time. But yeah, something like this. And you can use monofilament and you can use your favorite rod. Make sure you got good line, make sure your terminations are right, and make sure you've got a decent drag and you can get that cobia. He's strong and he's mad when you put a hook in him, and he's gonna make some decent runs, and I've even seen him jump. If anybody's caught a bunch of cobia, they've seen them jump. I'm sure I've seen them tail walk just like a bass. You know, you don't have to have a high dollar outfit to catch one. That's the point I'm trying to make. But this is kind of middle of the road. I like it because it's light, but it's still got a lot of backbone and power. Now, when I go cobia fishing, this is the kind of stuff I use right here. And I have a few clients that I'll let play around with this, and I'll tell you a story. This is basically a souped up trout rod with 30 pound braid. That's all that is. This very rod right here has probably landed 30 cobia last year. And it was never easy, but we got them. So this is kind of the lightest end of the spectrum that I would go to. Now, you know, this is just an old ugly stick rod, retails for 60, 70 bucks, and this reel is a 3,000 or 3,500 class reel. I mean, it's not a cheap reel, maybe 150, 200 bucks, something like that. And I keep good line on it, and I make sure everything's working good. But this is the kind of stuff I like to fish with, because when you get him on there, you know you've got him. So that's kind of the three sizes of spinning tackle I'll use cobia fishing. And of course you can use, you know, what you've got. I know plenty of guys that bottom fish, they use TLD 15s or 25s, or they use their bait casting reels, you know, like a Calcutta or whatever when they're casting, and you can use all that stuff. This is just what I use when I'm charter fishing because it's simple and it's very effective. Any questions about rods?
Any preference in line? I know you said braided, but
Just about everything I use is Power Pro. I'm not saying it's any better than anything else. It's just what I've always used. I've had really good luck with it. I use it 10 pound on my trout rods. I've got it on my offshore 80 wides. I've caught bluefin on it. It's just, that's what I use. All right. So from there, guys, talk a little bit about different ways to rig up bucktails and or live bait. This bucktail here, that little knot, see that little knot where it joins the braid and the leader material? That's called a double uni knot. That's the easiest way to connect leader materials. They'll tell you that knot's not that good for dissimilar diameters but that's not true. You just have to tie it correctly, a double uni knot. And the best way to learn to tie knots nowadays is YouTube. Just YouTube video on tying double uni knot, and it will show you how to tie that. This casting rod here, because it's a little bit longer rod, I've got probably 3.5 foot of leader material. I think this is 50-pound fluorocarbon, and that knot right there is just your standard clinch knot. There's no fancy loop or no fancy knot, it's just a little clinch knot. This is my go-to jig right here. This is how I would rig up. Like if you get in a bait ball and you're catching fish and you're tearing tackle up and you want to tie up real quick, this is how I do it. Because I don't have time for the fancy stuff. I'm just trying to get lines back in the water. Now, this rod here, rigged up with a bucktail, is a little different. I've got my little fancy loop knot right there, and there's a bunch of different names. I call it a mirror lure knot. You see how it's tied with a loop on there? And it does give your bucktail a little more action. Nothing wrong with that, it takes a little longer to tie. And then up here on this end, where the braid meets the leader material, this knot right here, you can tell is a much smoother, cleaner transition. And this is called an improved Albright knot. And if you had leader material that you wanted to reel in and out of your tip, I suggest this is the one you tie. On the boat, this one takes an extra 20 seconds to tie, and that one takes an extra 20 seconds to tie. So I might start the day rigged up like this. If we get into fish, I'm going to end the day rigged like that. And it's not because that isn't as strong. I actually think those knots are probably as strong or stronger. These are just a little bit cleaner, give the bucktail a little better action, and this one reels to the tip much better. That's the advantages. It's not really about strength. And it looks cooler if you like that kind of stuff. Some people are into that. Now, if you were, and we're going to finish up talking about where to find your cobias and bait ball and stuff, but if you were in a bait ball and wanted to use a live bait, you could use a swivel like I had rigged up here with a weight or without a weight. If you don't have multiple setups, that knot right there, you can cut your bucktail off, tie a hook on it real quick, put a live shad and flip it in there. And then you can switch back and forth if you decided you wanted to try something different. If you didn't have multiple setups. Typically I'm going to have 6 or 8 rods on the boat for 1 to 3 anglers. So I'm just going to grab a different rod. Everybody doesn't have that luxury. Any questions about that? Just remember that leader material is important. Cobia aren't extremely tackle shy most times, but I'm a firm believer in a couple feet of fluorocarbon anytime I'm cobia fishing. And the fluorocarbon, those of you that aren't familiar with it, is less visible because of light refraction in the water versus monofilament, and definitely it's less visible than tying straight to braid. And that's why we use it.
What do you use to put the fluorocarbon to the swivel? What now?
If I was actually tying a swivel between my braid and fluorocarbon,
No, you've got a swivel on your bottom rig.
right, yeah, that's that clinch knot tied on right here.
Push that. Okay.
Yeah, that's just a clinch knot right there. And there's 1,000 knots out there, and really the one you're most familiar with, that you can tie the best and have the most confidence in, is gonna work for you. These little clinch knots, I can tie those things asleep after a 12-pack, you know what I'm saying? So that's what I use. It's strong, it's a great knot, it's easy. Once you get up to about 60 or 80 pounds, it gets a little trickier to tie, but for everything below that, it's a piece of cake. And like I say, 40 or 50 pound leader material will work on your casting stuff, probably work a little better. So to tie 40 pounds with a clinch knot's a piece of cake, that's what I use, because I can tie them so quick. Any other questions about that? I'm gonna show y'all a couple lures I brought along. Bucktail, when it comes to sight casting, this is a Spro bucktail. It's kind of the standard, but there's plenty of knockoffs nowadays. I'm not promoting Spro. I just brought it because this is what a lot of people use. Advantages to this, it has a pretty good finish on it. They always have a super sharp hook. The hair is not buck hair, it's actually horse hair. They have good flash in them. Y'all see that little bit of flash right there, which is important. There's a lot of great things about this bucktail. I love using these. The one disadvantage to cobia fishing is that hook is small. It's a small hook. You'll lose fish sometimes because that hook's so small. So with that being said, you go to something like this. See that hook, the difference? It's a 9/0 hook. You get that into cobia, you've got a way better chance of keeping him connected. This is better glue than that little hook in that spray. I like a bigger hook.
What is that lure there?
That one is made by Tsunami. These just came out this year. I haven't even fished with one of them yet. I fished with the exact same design, the exact same bug-eyed head and all that. This one's just a little less expensive. And I tell you guys, if you're not catching cobia, your bucktail's gonna get tattered from casting and riding on the boat. It's gonna rust. But if you're catching cobia, you know, you can't expect to catch but a few fish on one of these, and it's gonna be chewed to bits. So if you can save a few bucks and still have a good hook, you can get by. That's how I look at it.
Can you run a trailer hook on those?
Can, but you don't need to. Some of the stuff like this hoagie eel right here, which is also a very popular bait, has 2 hooks in it. And this thing has no, does this one have, this one has no weight in it. But they make these that are weighted and unweighted. Every tackle shop around here sells these, and again, I'm not promoting anything. This is just one of the lures we use. It's just a big plastic jerk bait basically with a couple of hooks in it. But they work, and they make these in a variety of colors. This is another lure that's new this year, and for those of you that like extra hooks, it's got them. It's got a big hook in top. Y'all see that big hook in the top of it? And then in the bottom, it's got a great big treble hook. So if he hits that, it's not likely you're not gonna be connected. For me, charter fishing, I'm not a fan of that treble hook. That's a liability for me when the fish is thrashing around and all that. Those of you that can handle the fish and aren't scared of treble hooks, by all means, there it is. I'm probably gonna try a couple of these this year, but the first thing I'm gonna do is take that treble hook off and maybe put a J hook down there, because that treble hook's a liability. Treble hooks and casting people on a small boat creates problems. Ask me, because I've been hooked by them, even in the face, and it ain't fun. And the ER charges a lot to get them out. So that's kind of the basics of the artificials. And remember, there's a lot of people in the world that prefer to exclusively fish with artificials, whether it be cobia fishing, speckled trout fishing, whatever. And hey man, if that's how you roll, good on you. Me, I like to catch fish. If I've got a choice between not catching fish or putting that live bait out, I'm gonna put that live bait out. If I see a cobia and I've got a bucktail handy and it's gonna take me too long to get that live bait ready, I'm gonna throw that bucktail, and they'll eat them. I've caught just as many fish on bucktails as I have anything. But if you won't hit that, have your live bait standing by. Because there's been a lot of days a live bait will get it done when a bucktail wouldn't.
You use a combination of live bait on the bucktail?
Typically, I won't put a live bait on a bucktail. With that being said, sometimes when we're fishing bait balls, we snag baits. And anytime I see my client, I'm like, what do you got going on over there? Oh, I snagged a shad. I'll be like, all right, flip the bell and let it fall to the bottom. So he snagged a live bait with his bucktail, kind of blind casting or even sight casting. And I just tell him to let it fall to the bottom. That would be a tip I would remember, guys. Put that one in your book, because that is a surefire way to get a bite if there's one there. Most of the time, if I'm going to use a live bait, I want that circle hook, because it's so much better than any hook in a bucktail. I'm going to take just a piece of leader material with a termination to my braid, circle hook, and we'll hook him just like that and just flip him out there and just let him swim. And that cobia will pick him up, and you'll see that line, you'll cast it out and that braid will kind of be laying there, and then you'll see it come tight and start kind of going sideways, and just flip your bell, hold your rod tip up, and when it comes tight, it's off. You know what I mean?
You got 2 different weights on your jig heads there. Fish I've caught
we're on top. So I used the Hoagie heel, 1 ounce head,
Oh, yeah. Well,
nailed.
I'm
Now,
glad
if
you
you wanna
mentioned
get to
that.
a deep bait ball,
Yeah.
25 foot of water,
Mhm.
typically the cobia are down below. So you want 3 ounce maybe a jig head or something
I
like
usually
that?
don't fish a 3,
Mhm.
but I am glad he mentioned that because I failed to mention it myself. This is a 1 ounce bucktail.
Well, that's right.
Yep. That other one, they call it a 2, but it's really a little over 2. It's probably about 2 1/4. And there is a reason for that, just like he said. You can take this 1 ounce bucktail, and you can, and that's why I brought these worms. You can slow the descent of that bucktail by adding a curly tail. And I've always got something on the back of my bucktail, whether it's a curly tail or a powder tail or paddle tail or whatever. You know, but you can slow that thing down instead of it sinking like a rock. You take your old curly tail and put it on there. Not only are you adding some bling, but that'll slow it down so it doesn't sink as fast. Where you can kind of crank it at a moderate speed and it'll track a foot or 2 below the surface. And sometimes that's really important.
Those jigs, do you pop them or do you just like do a slow retrieve?
I always do a slow retrieve on the first cast. And you always want to lead the fish. And sometimes instead of getting a little too excited, just take a deep breath, especially free swimming cobia. A cobia in a bait ball has something to keep him there. A cobia that's free swimming has nothing to keep him there. So in a bait ball, you've got more room for error. If you see a free swimming cobia, you need to make sure you slow down and make that first cast count. So, you know, most of the time they're not zigzagging back and forth or swimming around in circles when they're free swimming without bait. They're kind of tracking in one direction. So you want to ease up as slow and quiet as possible and get just inside a casting range, and you want to lead that fish. When you make your cast, you want to pass past him and in front of him. So if he's on the surface, by the time you get to where he's at, you've got your bait at the correct cruising depth. So he's going to see it come right by him. And that's why I just crank it at the right speed to get it at the right depth. And most of the time when you're sight casting, A, you've got good sunlight, and B, the water's clear, so you can watch your bait and your fish at the same time. It's hard to sight cast when the water's dirty and when the sun isn't out. You know, most of the time we don't even start sight fishing until 9 o'clock in the morning because you don't have enough sunlight. All you've got is just glare on the water. So you can watch it, and just track it right by him. If he's hungry, 9 out of 10 times, if he's hungry, he'll hit it the very first time just by cranking it straight in. Now, if you do it and he doesn't slow down or turn or do anything, you're like, man, that second cast, give it some action, give it some jerking. But while you're making that second cast, you be screaming at somebody to hook up a live bait. You know what I'm saying? Because at the end of that second cast, if he didn't hit it when you got a little more aggressive, you got to go to plan B. Plan B is a live bait. You know what I mean? So keep that in mind. Any other questions about that? So we're going to talk about bait balls and a couple other things real quick before we wind down here.
Anything about color?
I really don't have any feedback on color. And I'll tell you why. I prefer a chartreuse, a white, or a pink tail. My plastics, that's what I'm going to use. You won't find anything else on my boat. Well, I've got some orange stuff like this, but it's just, I'm not saying anything wrong with it. At Hatteras, they swear by orange. I just don't have any confidence in it because I've caught so many on white, chartreuse, and pink. I know for a fact that cobia have been caught on every color in the ocean because I've witnessed it. If I could only have one color, it'd be white. And that's with anything, whether it's flounder or cobia or trout or pinfish, man. White has got it going on. Any other questions?
I've only caught small cobia, but I hear stories about bringing a cobia in the boat when they're still green.
Yeah, those stories are true.
Is that right?
Yeah. And that's another trick we do charter fishing, which is another cool thing about these smaller rods. versus these mules right here. 'Cause by the time you get him to the boat, you've worn him out some. I've actually had trips, bottom fishing, say for cobia, where a big rod, they'll set the hook, and in 30 seconds the cobia's like, he's right there, gaff him. I'm like, nope, ain't gonna happen. We're gonna wear old boy down before we bring him in the boat. I've tested it a few times, and I lost one gaff 2 years ago and had to go in after it because of that. Best thing to do is if you get a fish and you know he's green, and you can see that hook and you're feeling good about your hook set, is to wear him down. I hear these stories about clubbing them and all that, but I just like to wear him down where I can get that gaff, get him in the boat, and just shove him in the box and get somebody to sit on the box lid, and then you got him. That's how we do it. And we don't mess around, because when he gets out of the box, it's a bunch of trouble. I've had him snap reels, snap rods. I've had him knock my stereo speakers out of the boat. I mean, it's just get them in the box and bring them in tired, if you can. All right? Anybody else? All right. So we've talked about bottom fishing. We've talked about various tackle. We've talked about kind of where to bottom fish, inlets and different holes and things. And a lot of that is just going to be going and kind of reading the web and watching your buddy and looking for my boat, you know, that kind of thing. And we've talked about rod and reel setups, and we've talked about what to do when you see that cobia sight fishing. But there's a few things I want to tell you about a bait ball. And some of it has to do with etiquette. And I'm the guy that doesn't want anybody mad at me, because I'm out there every day. And I don't know how many of y'all knew me before I got here, but in the fishing community around here, everybody knows me. So I can't afford to make enemies. I try not to. You know how it is. Somebody's always going to be mad at you, but if it's the masses that aren't mad, you're still okay. Cobia fishing, a lot of people don't realize or don't care about a little bit of etiquette. If you leave here on Saturday morning, the cobia have been biting, it's all over the internet. You check my website, and of course I'm looking cool because I'm going to have a whole boatload of them, you know, and you're like, I'm going Saturday morning and I'm getting some cobia. You blast out of the inlet, and you turn to the westward, and you come up to a bait ball and it's got 9 boats in it. You know, you can pull up to that bait ball and try to fish if you want to, but there's 9 boats there. First off, you're probably going to make somebody mad. Somebody's probably already caught the dumb fish out of that bait ball. You know what I mean? And if you pull in there and hook one, somebody might run over it. I'm just telling you what I do. I'll push right on. Unless I think that's the only bait ball in Onslow Bay, which everybody knows where Onslow Bay is, right? That's a big body of water between Cape Lookout and Wilmington. I'm going to just push on and see if I can find my own little bait ball. And I say that because I've seen a lot of people get upset. So keep that in mind when you get out there. Especially early in the mornings, because they might not have made it further down the beach where the cobias are. And if you stop there, somebody might get ahead of it. So keep that in mind. You know what I mean? When you get that bait ball. Now, when you find your own private bait ball, or one that has a boat or two, or one that has your buddy in it, which is what I like to do. If it's somebody I know, I'll call, hey man, he's up there, see if I can get me a bite for my crew. And a lot of times they'll say, okay. You know, don't come blasting up. You just don't need to pull up there at 100 miles an hour. Once you see your bait ball, you see a boat or two or whatever, you see your bait flipping, just ease up to it nice and slow. And you don't even have to start casting when you get there. Sometimes it's okay to take a minute just to look around. Have a rod ready. So just pull up and take a peek at your bait ball. Sometimes, and I've done this a bunch, when you pull up, you're going to see 2 or 3 cobia just sitting there. Bait ball's right here circling, and they're just kind of cruising around the edge of it. If you pull up and take time to spot those fish before you cast, what's the chances of making a good cast versus a bad cast? If you don't look at that bait ball when you pull up and you make a blind cast, you might hit that cobia in the back of the head, and he might head back to the Gulf Stream. So when you pull up, take your time. Ease up to it, look at the bait ball, see if you can see anything. Now some signs, telltale signs, that there's fish in there, if you don't actually see the fish, are great big holes opening up in the bait ball because there's a predator of some sort. It might be a bluefish this big, it might be a cobia that big, or it might be a shark this big. You don't know. But if you see that hole opening up, something's creating that. Because those menhaden are genetically programmed to play follow the leader. So if one of them sees something scary and turns off, 5,000 of them are gonna fall, and that's where those holes come from. Something else is a slick on top of the surface. That slick is created from something eating those menhaden. It's not necessarily created by the menhaden themselves being there. So something could be in there chewing. Something else to keep your eye out for are big turtles, mainly leatherbacks, schools of rays, checking buoys, anything that's floating, you know, as you're making your way down the beach. Check all that stuff. And ease up to it and take your time. And just remember that when you get that opportunity, maintain your cool and make a good cast. Sometimes you'll only get one. A lot of times you only get one. It's one of the things I do, especially if I'm with a crew I'm not familiar with, sight casting cobias. Most of the time, I'm gonna make the first cast of the day and see if I can hook that fish. And then once I hook one, they see me do it, I get a fish in the boat, some of the pressure's off of me. Because a lot of times, one cobia in a day is a good day. I mean, it's not like going and catching trout where you're trying to, you know, get multiple fish. A lot of times, one cobia is all you get for the day. So, you know, just take your time, make that cast count. Any questions from there? Surely somebody else has a question. Told you so.
I guess depths, I mean, what depths?
If we're riding blind down the beach, whether it be east or west, or even out on the shoals, or up on the east side, on the east beach, if we don't have any idea where bait is or where bait has been, you know, we're gonna zigzag from 20 to 50 feet. You know, usually, and I'm fortunate, I'm gonna have information from the day before or from another guide that's ahead of me. You might not always have that option. But that's typically the zone for the bait balls. You can catch cobia and bait balls deeper than 50 feet, but it's a lot harder. Because I know I've seen bait balls in 60, 70 feet of water, and I've seen cobia, and they're always a little bit tougher to catch. Because there's just so much more water column that you're trying to figure out where he's at, because he's up and down and all around, you know. So we usually stay inside of that 50, 55 foot. Now, with that being said, the last thing I wanted to touch on was structure fishing for cobia. This same time of year when these fish are coming in, if you can't find a bait ball, and you don't feel like bottom fishing, ride to your favorite artificial reef or your favorite little rock, your favorite buoy, and take a couple live baits and just make a blind drift. Or just drift it, jigging your bucktail. You'd be surprised at the number of fish that are caught that way. And it's a little more interactive than bottom fishing. You know, if you don't want to sit still long enough to bottom fish. All right?
When you made that cast in the bait ball, if you saw an opening or a slip, you let that bucktail sink down? How long you let it sink?
It's one of those things that you just kind of play it by ear. You know, sometimes your bait balls are sort of shallow. Like if you're in 30 feet of water, they might only consume the top 5 feet of water. And then other times that bait ball may go all the way to the bottom. So if you're looking down in that hole, you're on the edge of the bait ball and you're like, man, the bait just goes forever. Then you might say, hey, you know, your buddy, make a cast, work the surface, I'm gonna try to get it mid-water. So you're, you know, kind of covering it. And just vary. And if all else fails, go all the way to the bottom. Especially with that live bait.
Trolling the beach, you pick up a lot of bait balls, especially midday or after some of the boat traffic's picked up that are running 18, 19, 20 feet deep, you know, it's 6 feet off the bottom. Do you even stop and mess with them, or you just cruise on looking for something else?
You can catch fish out of those. We did it one day last year. For whatever reason, something pushed all the bait toward the shoals. It was actually kind of between, if anybody knows anything about the bottom out here, between the subnet, which is offshore the rock jetty at Cape Lookout, kind of toward the trawler. All the bait moved out there, and we knew it was there. It wouldn't come to the surface, but we knew it was menhaden by the way they were marking. And we went out there and blind fished on the bottom, drifting through those bait balls with live bait, and we caught some fish. It's a lot more work, and it's a lot harder to figure out, and it's just like everything else, it's not always gonna work, but if nothing else is happening, you don't have anything to lose by trying it, because you can catch them there. If you've got good electronics and you know how to use them, you can learn to mark cobias on your electronics. I'm not gonna get into that, everybody always wants to, but there's so many different types of electronics and so many different ways to set them up, and there's such a broad scale of aptitude on electronics that it's tough to talk about. But if you learn your electronics and you've got good stuff, you can mark cobias, especially drifting like wrecks and reefs and rocks. I had a guy fly fishing last year, and I said, man, there's a cobia at 40 feet, let it sink. He's like, what do you mean? I said, just do it. He let it sink, and it was a cobia. But I spent a lot of time looking at my electronics, and I didn't know for sure, but it was.
Could have been a refund.
So, anyway, from there, guys, unless y'all need to book some charters, or you have any more questions, I think we're winding down. Surely somebody else has a question.
How far did you chase them after you hooked them with a fly rod?
Well, anybody that does much fly fishing knows that if you've got the right fly outfit, you can really bust a fish's behind. And this guy had good stuff. Like the stuff we shark fish and amberjack with, 10, 12 weight rods, I mean, they're just as mean as any of this stuff. But you gotta know how to use it. You gotta have right setups. So, I mean, he spent 15 minutes on that fish probably. Same thing he would have on one of these rods. He's a good fisherman, man. All right?
What kind of reports are you hearing now?
About
Where the fish are, I mean, further south, you hear anything?
what, cobias?
Yes.
Oh yeah, there's plenty of fish south, there's plenty of fish offshore here. I'm telling you, a buddy of mine went yesterday and caught a boatload, but he was in 180 feet of water. He had a cobia tried to eat his GoPro camera yesterday and has it on film. So yeah, they're there. I'm not gonna ride that far on a cobia trip. I mean, that's that's an offshore trip. In years past, when we've had better weather, I'll get what I call sponsors, which are my buddies that have gas money and beer, and ride out there and catch some cobias in the wintertime. But this year we hadn't had any weather for it. Now the season's on me, so I'm not even gonna get to go this year. I'm just gonna have to wait a couple weeks and do it the old fashioned way, right here on the beach.
I probably missed that part of your speech. What's the water temperature line I'm looking for?
When it gets 68, I've seen them in 66, 67, 68 to 70 is the beginning of it, to 72. 70, 71's probably, if it'll get there real quick, tighten your belt because it's getting ready to happen. Especially if those bait balls show up on the beach. What we need for optimum cobia fishing here is from Cape Lookout Shoals, and anybody who looks at water temperature sees that Gulf Stream, the inner limits come in and swirl that warm water on the east side of the shoals. From that warm swirl north, we need that cold water from up there at Hatters where the Gulf Stream meets up with the Labrador. Cold water there, and then from everything down here, we need it to warm up quick. That's what happened 4 years ago, and it was phenomenal cobia fishing. And we're kind of set up for that a little bit right now, so cross your fingers, get your bucktails ready. Okay? Oh yeah, I had a trip, well I had 2 trips yesterday, but yesterday morning I was getting 62.9 at 7:30 on the surface. So, and that's something else, your morning surface temperature is usually a little more accurate than your afternoon surface temperature, so, it's warming up good. I'm kind of excited. I was kind of like depressed almost after this winter we had, but I'm feeling a little better now. Okay, guys? Well, that's about it, unless somebody else has a question. Y'all look well informed. I must have done a good job.
You got enough cards you can hand out to everybody?
Yeah, I gave everybody a rack card, but I do.
Okay.
I've got a stack
I
of
need
these.
one of your cards too.
Yeah, here, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll just give you a stack.